Here's a focused description of the arrest of Dang in Khartoum from the novel The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Context and circumstances of Dang's arrest. After Dang and Insaf's marriage is annulled by the Sharia court in Sudan on the grounds of tribal inadequacy and lack of guardian consent, the couple continues to live together as husband and wife, defying the court's ruling. This act is considered illegal under Sudanese Islamic law, which views their cohabitation as adultery. When the couple plans to escape Sudan for India to seek safety and a new life, 2 Arab policemen raid their hut in the shanty town of Al-Ashash on the day of their planned departure. Dang, aware of the danger, urges Insaf to escape while he confronts the officers. He physically fights the policemen to give Insaf time to flee to the airport and leave the country. During the struggle, Dang is shot in the chest by one of the policemen. He survives the gunshot but is arrested and taken into custody. Legal and physical consequences. Hospitalization and imprisonment. After being shot, Dang is hospitalized. Once he recovers, he is transferred to jail. Sharia court trial. Dang is tried in the Sharia court for the crime of illegal cohabitation adultery with Insaf, since their marriage had been annulled. The court finds him guilty. Punishment. Dang is sentenced to 100 lashes, which are administered in public. The flogging is so severe that he loses consciousness before the punishment is complete, and his spine is irreparably damaged, leaving him disabled and confined to a wheelchair. Isolation. Dang is left alone, disowned by his family, and separated from Insaf, who has escaped to India. Emotional and narrative impact. Dang's arrest and brutal punishment are pivotal moments in the novel. They highlight the cruelty and rigidity of the legal and religious systems in Sudan, the intersection of racial, social, and religious oppression. Dang's sacrifice and loyalty, he risks and ultimately loses his health and freedom to protect Insaf. The deep trauma and isolation experienced by both Dang and Insaf as a result of their love being criminalized. Direct quote from the novel. During my struggle with the 2 policemen, one of them shot me in the chest. Fortunately, I survived that fatal bullet. When I became fully recovered, the police transferred me from the hospital to jail. 2 months later, the Sharia court convicted me of living illegally with my ex-wife and committing adultery with her. Therefore, I was convicted and severely flogged with 100 lashes. I still bear the effects and scars of those brutal lashes on my back. Because of this inhuman and brutal punishment, my spinal cord is irreparably damaged, and I became disabled and confined to a wheelchair. If you'd like Here's a detailed description of the arrest of Insaf in India from the novel The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Context leading to the arrest. After fleeing Sudan due to persecution, Insaf arrives in Bombay, Mumbai, India, on a tourist visa. She stays at the apartment of Christina, her husband Dang's cousin, who is a student at the University of Bombay. Christina lives with other Sudanese and Nigerian students, and her apartment becomes a gathering place for several foreign students. The arrest scene. 1. Police raid. One morning, while Insaf is alone in Christina's apartment, Christina is out. The doorbell rings repeatedly. Insaf opens the door to find 2 young Sudanese men, Christina's brother and cousin, who enter and start preparing breakfast. More guests arrive, including a Nigerian man and his Sudanese girlfriend, Julia. The apartment is lively, with loud music and TV. Suddenly, the doorbell rings again. This time, 4 Indian men enter the apartment, armed and aggressive. They are not thieves, but Indian narcotics police conducting a raid. 2. Discovery of drugs. The police search the apartment and find a yellow package in Christina's room containing 25 kilograms of drugs, some already packaged in capsules. The police accuse the group of being involved in drug smuggling, suspecting that the drugs were to be swallowed and smuggled out of the country. 3. Mass arrest. All the foreign students and guests present, including Insaf, are ordered to kneel, hands on their heads, and are tied together with ropes. More Sudanese students arrive and are also detained. The police collect passports and interrogate everyone. Insaf, who is still wearing a borrowed nightgown, having left her belongings in Sudan, is especially vulnerable and frightened. 4. Insaf's interrogation. Insaf explains she is a tourist, not a student, and that she arrived from Sudan the previous night. She shows her Sudanese passport. The police, suspicious of her presence and her lack of local ties, accuse her of being part of the drug smuggling operation. 5. Transfer to jail. All the suspects, including Insaf, are transported to jail. The women are sent to the notorious Arthur Road Women's Jail in Bombay, described as filthy, overcrowded, and dangerous. Insaf is left with only the nightgown she was wearing, no soap, toothbrush, or basic supplies, and is given only one meal a day. Aftermath and impact. Insaf is subjected to harsh conditions, starvation, and third-degree interrogation, torture, by Indian police, leading her to confess to crimes she did not commit in order to protect her unborn child. She is isolated, humiliated, and accused of being a prostitute and drug dealer by other Sudanese students and prisoners. Eventually, she is bailed out by a compassionate Indian Christian family, but the trauma of the arrest and imprisonment leaves a lasting impact on her. In summary, Insaf's arrest in India is a traumatic, chaotic event triggered by a police raid on her cousin's apartment, where drugs are discovered. She is swept up in a mass arrest, interrogated, and imprisoned under harsh conditions, despite her innocence. This episode marks a major turning point in her journey, highlighting her vulnerability as a refugee and the compounded injustices she faces in exile. Certainly. Here's a comparative analysis of Deng's arrest in Sudan and Insaf's arrest in India as depicted in The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. This comparison highlights both the similarities and differences in their experiences, the causes, the process, and the consequences of their arrests. 1. Context and causes. Deng's arrest in Sudan. Cause. Deng is arrested primarily for his relationship with Insaf, which defies racial, tribal, and religious boundaries. After their marriage is annulled by the Sharia court on grounds of tribal inadequacy, Deng and Insaf continue to live together as husband and wife, which is considered adultery under Sudanese law. Trigger: the couple's refusal to separate after the Sharia court's ruling, and their attempt to flee Sudan, leads to a police raid on their hut. Deng sacrifices himself to allow Insaf to escape. Insaf's arrest in India. Cause: Insaf is arrested during a police raid on her cousin Christina's apartment in Bombay, where drugs are discovered. She is swept up in a mass arrest of foreign students, despite her innocence. Trigger: her presence at the wrong place and time, combined with her vulnerability as a refugee and lack of local support, leads to her being accused of drug trafficking. 2. The arrest process. Deng. Violence and sacrifice. When police raid their hut, Deng physically confronts the officers to give Insaf a chance to escape. He is shot in the chest during the struggle. Aftermath: Deng survives the shooting but is arrested, imprisoned, and later flogged with 100 lashes for adultery, living with Insaf after their marriage was annulled. The flogging leaves him permanently disabled. Insaf. Mass arrest. Indian narcotics police storm the apartment, find drugs, and arrest everyone present, including Insaf. She is tied up, interrogated, and sent to Arthur Road Women's Jail. Aftermath: Insaf is subjected to harsh conditions, starvation, and torture, third-degree interrogation, leading her to confess to crimes she did not commit to protect her unborn child. She is isolated, humiliated, and accused of being a prostitute and drug dealer. 3. Legal and social consequences. Deng. Legal. Tried under Sharia law, convicted of adultery, and flogged. His marriage to Insaf is declared invalid, and he is left disabled. Social. Disowned by his family, loses his fiancée, and is ostracized by both his own community and Insaf's. Faces lifelong stigma and physical disability. Insaf. Legal. Faces drug trafficking charges in India, is denied refugee status by the UN in India, and faces the threat of extradition to Sudan, where she would face execution for apostasy and murder. Social: ostracized by the Sudanese student community in India, slandered as a prostitute and drug dealer, and left without support except for the compassion of an Indian Christian family. 4. Psychological and emotional impact. Deng: humiliation and trauma, endures public flogging, permanent disability, and the loss of family and future. Resilience: despite everything, remains loyal to Insaf, advocates for her, and ultimately helps save her from extradition. Insaf: despair and isolation, suffers torture, starvation, and public shaming. Experiences deep trauma, loss of dignity, and fear for her child's life. Resilience: survives through the help of strangers, maintains hope, and eventually finds justice and reunion with Deng. 5. Key similarities and differences. Aspect: Deng's arrest in Sudan. Insaf's arrest in India. Cause: defiance of Sharia law, adultery, wrong place, wrong time, drug raid. Process: violent confrontation, shot, arrested, flogged, mass arrest, tied up, interrogated, jailed. Legal system: Sharia law, religious court, secular Indian law, criminal court. Treatment: physical violence, flogging, disability, torture, starvation, humiliation. Social response: ostracism, family rejection, slander, isolation, community hostility. Outcome: disability, loss, but eventual reunion, trauma, but eventual rescue and asylum. Summary: both Deng and Insaf are arrested as a direct result of their love and their refusal to conform to oppressive social and legal norms. Deng's arrest is rooted in religious and racial prejudice within Sudan, leading to brutal physical punishment and lifelong disability. Insaf's arrest in India is the result of being caught in a system that is indifferent to her innocence, leading to psychological trauma and social isolation. Both endure immense suffering, but their resilience and the help of a few compassionate individuals ultimately lead to their survival and reunion. Here's a detailed account of how Deng's parents react to his arrest and punishment, based on the content of The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Background: Deng, after helping his wife Insaf escape from Sudan to India, is shot by police, survives, but is later arrested and convicted by the Sharia court in Khartoum for adultery because their marriage was annulled by the court. He is flogged with 100 lashes, which leaves him severely injured and disabled. His parents' initial reaction: shock and grief. Deng's parents, Mr. Majak Nasir, a high-ranking Sudanese army officer, and Mrs. Ababa Nasser, an Ethiopian Christian, are devastated when they hear about their son's arrest, injury, and subsequent punishment. Immediate response: when Mr. Nasir receives a phone call informing him that Deng has been shot and is in critical condition, he rushes to the hospital, breaking traffic laws in his panic and grief. Both parents are described as collapsing in tears at the sight of their son's bloodied, unconscious body. During Deng's hospitalization: desperation. The parents are desperate to save their son. They pay for the best medical care, including a private hospital room and expensive medicines. They refuse to allow an autopsy when Deng is declared clinically dead after the flogging, insisting on further medical intervention. Hope and vigil. They spend days and nights at his bedside, praying and hoping for his recovery. When Deng is transferred to the military hospital, they continue to advocate for him and ensure he receives the best possible care. After Deng's survival and disability. Protectiveness. Once Deng survives but is left disabled, his parents bring him home and care for him. His mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasser, takes an indefinite leave from her teaching job to nurse him. Family reconciliation. The trauma of Deng's ordeal leads to a temporary reconciliation between his parents, who had previously divorced over the conflict surrounding his relationship with Insaf. Reaction to legal proceedings. Anger at the system. Mr. Nasir is furious at the Sudanese legal and religious system for what has happened to his son. He tries to intervene with the authorities, even appealing to the highest levels of the military and government to prevent Deng's flogging, but is told that Sharia law cannot be overruled. Helplessness. Despite his status, Mr. Nasir is powerless to stop the punishment. He offers to pay large sums of money to commute the sentence, but the judge refuses, citing religious law. Blame and bitterness. Blaming Insaf. Both parents, especially Mrs. Ababa Nasir, blame Insaf for Deng's suffering. She refers to Insaf as the cause of all the family's misfortunes, including Deng's injury, disability, and estrangement from his family. Refusal to accept Insaf, even after Deng and Insaf are reunited in London. Mrs. Ababa Nasir is openly hostile, calling security to have Insaf removed from Deng's hospital room and reporting her to the police for using a false identity. Final outcome. Permanent rupture. The parents' inability to forgive or accept Insaf leads to a final break between Deng and his family. Deng chooses to stand by Insaf, even at the cost of losing his parents' support. Ongoing grief. The parents remain bitter and unreconciled, refusing to respond to letters from Deng and Insaf after they resettle in Canada. Direct quotes from the novel. The angry father, Majak Nasir, locked himself in the four corners of his house. He is deeply hurt by his son's stern decision to pursue his defense in criminal court for his former Arab girlfriend, Insaf. He convinced himself that his African son rejected him and pursued a fallen Arab girl. Despite this, the grieving father, deep in his heart, always misses his only son, Deng, and longs for his beloved Ethiopian wife, Ababa. His parents took him to their beautiful residence, which is located in a luxurious neighborhood called Riyadh City. On the same day, Mr. Majak Nasir reconciled with his divorced wife, Mrs. Ababa Nasir. He apologized for her first divorce, took her back as his wife, and promised that he would not divorce her again, no matter what happened between them. The Ethiopian mother took an indefinite leave from her teaching position at the girls' high school and stayed home to care for and nurse her beloved son. Mrs. Ababa Nasir, in particular, is openly hostile and refuses to accept Insaf, even when she tries to reconcile in London. Her actions result in Insaf being detained by the police, further complicating her legal and emotional struggles. The confrontation leads to a final rupture between Deng and his mother, as Deng chooses to stand by Insaf, even at the cost of losing his mother's support. In summary, Deng's parents react to his arrest and punishment with shock, grief, and desperate attempts to save him, but ultimately with bitterness and blame, especially toward Insaf. Their inability to accept his choices or forgive Insaf leads to a permanent rupture in the family, even as they continue to love and mourn their son. Based on the content of The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, Deng's reactions to his parents, especially after his arrest, punishment, and their responses, are complex, emotional, and deeply revealing of his character and values. Deng's reactions to his parents. 1. Pain and disappointment. Deng is deeply hurt by his parents' inability to accept his love for Insaf and their harsh judgment of her. When his father, Mr. Majak Nasir, visits him in his impoverished hut after Deng has been estranged from the family, Deng is subdued, respectful, but emotionally fragile. He is moved to tears by his father's accusations and disappointment, especially when his father blames Insaf for all the family's troubles and calls her a criminal, murderer, thief, and dirty prostitute. 2. Defense of Insaf and himself. Deng does not remain silent in the face of his parents' condemnation. He tries to explain that Insaf did not leave him willingly, but was forced away by the Sharia court's annulment of their marriage due to racial prejudice. He insists that Insaf never saw him as inferior and that their love was genuine and mutual. Deng rejects his father's view that Insaf is a fallen Arab girl or a prostitute and defends her character and their relationship. 3. Loyalty and refusal to abandon Insaf. When his father offers him a chance to return home on the condition that he leaves Insaf and their unborn child, Deng refuses. He states unequivocally that Insaf is his wife, the child is his, and he will protect them at any cost, even if it means being disowned by his father. Deng's response is marked by a quiet but firm courage. He does not raise his voice or become aggressive, but he stands his ground, even as his father becomes more agitated and angry. 4. Emotional complexity. Dang is heartbroken by the rift with his father, but he does not let it break his spirit or his commitment to Insaf. He expresses hope that, despite everything, his father might one day understand or forgive him. He is frustrated by the injustice of the Sharia court's decision and the prejudice that has destroyed his marriage and family. He tries to make his father see that their suffering is not due to personal failure, but to a system that values race and tribe over love and humanity. 5. Choosing love and integrity over comfort. Dang chooses love and integrity over comfort and acceptance, even at great personal cost. He is respectful but unyielding, defending his wife and their love against his father's accusations and the weight of tradition. Direct quotes from the novel. The prodigal son exploded in anger, saying, "Insaf has left me because of you, father. We were separated because my father is Majak Nasir and her father is Sulla al-Junaid. More simply put, my father is a Negro African and her father is a free Arab. I am also a son of the Dinka tribe and she is a daughter of the Shurjia tribe. If you want me to return to your home, you must accept me along with my wife and the child she is carrying in her womb. I will never allow that accursed Arab woman to step foot on my doorstep. If she comes here into this filthy small nest, don't be surprised if she is reported to the police. Insaf is my wife, and the fetus in her womb is my child. If anyone tries to harm them, whether he is a police officer or a relative, I will be the first person to sacrifice his life for them." Summary table. Aspect Dang's reaction. Pain and disappointment, deeply hurt by parents' rejection and accusations. Defense of Insaf firmly defends Insaf's character and their love. Loyalty refuses to abandon Insaf, even if it means being disowned. Emotional complexity, sadness, hope for reconciliation, frustration at injustice. Integrity chooses love and truth over comfort, stands up to family and tradition. In essence, Dang reacts to his parents with a mix of pain, loyalty, and moral courage. He is respectful but unyielding, defending his wife and their love against his parents' accusations and the weight of tradition. He chooses love and integrity over comfort and acceptance, even at great personal cost. Drawing directly from the content of The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, Dang's feelings about the flogging he endured are described with deep emotional and physical impact. How Dang felt about the flogging. 1. Physical agony and trauma. The flogging is described as brutal and inhumane. Dang is tied to an iron pole in a public place and flogged by 2 executioners in front of a large crowd. He loses consciousness before the executioners finish half of the 100 lashes, but they continue to beat him while he is half dead until the punishment is complete. The flogging leaves him with severe injuries, including irreparable damage to his spinal cord, resulting in permanent disability and confinement to a wheelchair. 2. Humiliation and public shame. The punishment is not only physically excruciating, but also deeply humiliating. Dang is flogged in public, stripped of his dignity, and made a spectacle for others. The narrative emphasizes the shame and degradation he feels, being treated as a criminal and an outcast for loving across racial and tribal lines. 3. Emotional pain and injustice. Dang feels a profound sense of injustice and betrayal, not just by the legal system, but by society and even his own family. He is punished not for a crime of violence or theft, but for his love for Insaf, which the Sharia court deems adultery after annulling their marriage on racial grounds. The flogging becomes a symbol of the cruelty and prejudice embedded in the system, and Dang is left feeling isolated, powerless, and deeply wounded. 4. Enduring loyalty and defiance. Despite the agony and humiliation, Dang does not renounce his love for Insaf. He endures the punishment with a sense of tragic dignity, refusing to abandon his principles or the woman he loves. The scars on his back and his disability become lasting reminders of both his suffering and his resistance. Direct quotes from the novel. On Friday afternoon, they brought me near Omdurman Mosque and tied me with ropes to an iron pole. It was a very painful and so humiliating to be flogged by two executioners in front of a large crowd of people. I lost consciousness before the executioners had finished half of the brutal flogging. However, they continued to carry out the punishment and beat me while I was half dead until they completed 100 lashes. My body was then transferred from the Grand Mosque to the civil hospital for an autopsy. If it had not been for my father's objection, the hospital's doctors and nurses would have killed me inside the autopsy room. Because of this inhuman and brutal punishment, my spinal cord is irreparably damaged, and I became disabled and confined to a wheelchair. Summary table. Aspect Deng's feelings. Physical excruciating pain, loss of consciousness, permanent disability. Emotional humiliation, shame, sense of injustice, isolation. Psychological trauma, bitterness, but also enduring loyalty and defiance. Symbolic, the flogging represents the cruelty of the system and the cost of loving against social boundaries. In summary, Deng experiences the flogging as a moment of profound agony, humiliation, and injustice. It leaves him physically broken, but does not break his spirit or his love for Insaf. The scars and disability become both a mark of his suffering and a testament to his resistance against a system that punished him for love. Here's how Insaf reacts to Deng's flogging, based on the content of The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Insaf's reaction to Deng's flogging. 1. Deep emotional pain and guilt. Insaf is devastated by the news of Deng's flogging. She feels a profound sense of guilt, believing that Deng is suffering because of his love and loyalty to her. She blames herself for the pain and humiliation inflicted on Deng, knowing that their relationship, deemed abominable by society, was the reason for his punishment. 2. Helplessness and despair. Insaf is tormented by her inability to help or protect Deng. She is forced to witness, from a distance, the consequences of the injustice and prejudice that have targeted them both. The knowledge that Deng is being publicly flogged, humiliated, and left disabled fills her with despair and a sense of powerlessness. 3. Renewed trauma and fear. The flogging of Deng is not just a physical punishment for him, but a psychological trauma for Insaf. It reinforces her own experiences of violence, public shaming, and legal persecution. She fears for Deng's life and future, especially after learning that the flogging has left him permanently disabled. 4. Strengthen loyalty and love. Despite her pain, Insaf's love and loyalty to Deng are only strengthened. She admires his courage and sacrifice, and her determination to stand by him is renewed. The ordeal deepens her resolve to resist the forces that seek to destroy them, even as she mourns the suffering they have endured. Direct quotes from the novel. She knew and understood that she did not kill anyone except the pimp woman who tried to turn her into a kidnapped sex slave and locked her in her home to satisfy her greed for wealth by selling her young body to men, taking her virginity, and desecrating her purity. Therefore, Insaf was surprised when she heard the death sentence against her. Since then, she refused to eat food or drink water except by force. Every day, some violent guards forced a little food and a few drops of water into her dry mouth and empty stomach. They want to keep her alive for 7 days until the day she is hanged to death inside Cooper Central Prison. They don't want to be responsible for starving her to death. During her prolonged period of imprisonment, Insaf lost a lot of weight. Her face became pale, losing half of its beauty, and her body was robbed of its femininity and sexual appeal. She has not been able to wash her body and comb her hair since the day she was sentenced to death. After her condemnation, no one is allowed to visit her. She felt extremely miserable and longed for death to free her from this inhuman treatment. His heart and mind have been torn and divided between difficult choices. His conscience tormented him all night long. His heart is crying for his mother and father. His mind is longing for his African fiancée, Susie. His conscience is bleeding because of the suffering of his Arab lover Insaf. Many times, he pulled his hair and beat his chest to relieve the pain in his heart. He cried over the loss of his African fiancée and regretted separating from his parents, but his longing for his Arab girlfriend prevented him from retracting his correct decision to appoint a lawyer to defend her. He thought that his love for Insaf had died when he lost her in the city of Gedaref, but now he discovered that her love remains in his heart forever. Summary table. Aspect Insaf's reaction. Emotional pain devastated, guilt-ridden, blames herself for Dang's suffering. Helplessness, feels powerless to help or protect Dang. Trauma, relives her own experiences of violence and public shaming. Loyalty, love, and loyalty to Dang are strengthened, admires his courage. Resolve deepens her determination to resist injustice and stand by Dang. In summary, Insaf's reaction to Dang's flogging is one of deep pain, guilt, and helplessness, but also of unwavering love and loyalty. The trauma of seeing Dang suffer for their love intensifies her own suffering, but it also strengthens her resolve to endure and resist the injustice they both face. In The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, Insaf's journey is one of relentless trauma, but also of remarkable resilience. Here's how she copes with her trauma, based on the novel's content. 1. Enduring and surviving repeated trauma. Insaf is subjected to physical and sexual violence, forced circumcision, attempted rape, public shaming, torture in prison. Psychological abuse, isolation, betrayal by family and community, false accusations, public humiliation. Legal persecution, wrongful imprisonment, death sentence, threat of execution, exile. Despite these, she refuses to surrender. Even in her darkest moments, such as when she is sentenced to death and left in solitary confinement, she clings to hope, telling her newborn son, "We will survive this." 2. Drawing strength from small acts of hope. Motherhood as lifeline. Insaf's promise to her child becomes a source of strength. The act of cradling her son and vowing to survive for him gives her a reason to endure. Faith and prayer. Even as her religious identity shifts, prayer and spiritual reflection remain a source of comfort. She prays with the Indian Christian family and finds solace in their unconditional love. Small rituals, simple acts, washing, eating, caring for her child, or even just surviving another day become victories over despair. 3. Finding compassion and new community. Support from outsiders. When her own community abandons her, Insaf finds acceptance and support from unexpected sources, especially the Indian Christian Matthew family. Their unconditional compassion helps her begin to heal. Building new bonds, she gradually learns to trust again, forming deep bonds with those who show her kindness, and eventually finds a sense of belonging in her new family. 4. Asserting agency and defiance. Standing up for herself. Insaf's journey is marked by moments of defiance, killing her would-be rapist in self-defense, slapping a religious leader who tries to shame her, refusing to be cowed by threats or humiliation. Refusing shame, she rejects the shame imposed on her by society, refusing to let her identity be defined by others' accusations or by her suffering. 5. Transforming pain into resilience. From victim to survivor, each ordeal, whether in Sudan, India, or the UK, forces Insaf to adapt and assert her own worth. She moves from being a passive victim to an active survivor, making hard choices and asserting her voice, even when it means standing alone. Empathy for others. Her suffering deepens her empathy for other marginalized or abused people, and she often shows compassion to those who are also outcasts. 6. Reclaiming identity and purpose. Conversion and self-definition. Insaf's eventual conversion to Christianity is not just spiritual, but a reclaiming of agency. Wearing a cross becomes a symbol of her new identity and her refusal to be shamed. Motherhood and family. Reuniting with Dang and raising their children in a new country gives her a renewed sense of purpose and hope for the future. Direct quotes from the novel. In the darkest hour of her life, as the iron bars of a foreign jail closed around her and the world seemed to have turned its back, Insaf cradled her newborn son and whispered a promise into the silence. "We will survive this." It was in that moment, hungry, alone, and accused, that hope became her lifeline. Surviving this ordeal, Insaf learns to rely more on her own judgment and inner strength, rather than seeking validation or safety from others. She becomes more guarded, but also more determined to survive on her own terms. Within a few months, Insaf blossomed like a beautiful rose in that loving and well-cared-for home. The Muslim wife found a significant difference between the love of the Indian Christian family and the persecution of the Sudanese Christian family. Summary table: How Insaf copes with trauma. Coping mechanism description. Endurance and survival, refuses to surrender, clings to hope, survives each day. Drawing strength from hope, finds purpose in motherhood, prayer, and small acts of self-care. Finding new community, accepts compassion from outsiders, builds new bonds. Asserting agency, defends herself, stands up to abusers, rejects imposed shame. Transforming pain, moves from victim to survivor, develops empathy for others. Reclaiming identity, converts faith, claims new identity, finds purpose in family and future. In essence, Insaf copes with her trauma through a combination of endurance, hope, defiance, and the healing power of compassion from others. Her journey is one of transformation, from a silenced victim to a resilient survivor who ultimately claims her own voice, dignity, and future. Faith plays a profound and evolving role in Insaf's healing throughout The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Here's how faith shapes her journey from trauma to resilience, based on the novel's content. 1. Faith as a source of survival and hope. Early in her ordeal, Insaf's Muslim faith is both a comfort and a source of pain. She prays for deliverance during her imprisonment, forced marriage, and public shaming. Even when her faith community turns against her, prayer and spiritual reflection remain a lifeline. In her darkest moments, such as when she is sentenced to death and left alone in a foreign jail, she clings to faith as a last hope. She whispers to her newborn son, "We will survive this," turning her promise into a prayer and act of faith. 2. Faith as a site of betrayal and transformation. Betrayal by religious authorities. Insaf's suffering is often justified by religious law and leaders. Her forced circumcision, annulment of marriage, and death sentence are all carried out in the name of Islam. This betrayal leads to a crisis of faith, deepening her trauma, but also prompting her to question and seek new meaning. Spiritual transformation. When she is taken in by the Indian Christian Matthew family, she experiences a different kind of faith, one rooted in unconditional compassion and acceptance. Their prayers, kindness, and refusal to judge her become a source of healing. 3. Faith as healing and empowerment. Gradual embrace of Christianity. Insaf's participation in the Matthew family's prayers and her eventual conversion to Christianity are not acts of escape, but of agency and gratitude. She finds in their faith a model of love and forgiveness that contrasts with the judgment and violence she experienced before. Symbolic acts. Wearing a cross becomes a powerful symbol of her new identity and her refusal to be shamed. It is both a spiritual and psychological anchor, helping her reclaim dignity and hope. 4. Faith as community and belonging. Finding a new spiritual family. The Matthew family's faith community offers Insaf a sense of belonging she never found in her own. Their prayers for her, especially during her legal battles and threats of deportation, give her strength and remind her she is not alone. Prayer as comfort. Insaf learns to pray with them and even asks Mrs. Matthew to pray for her husband Deng's life. The act of praying together, regardless of religious background, becomes a source of comfort and solidarity. 5. Faith as a foundation for forgiveness and moving forward. Letting go of shame. Through her new faith, Insaf learns to forgive herself and those who hurt her. She lets go of the shame imposed by her past and embraces a future defined by love, not trauma. Raising her children in faith. In her new life in Canada, Insaf chooses to raise her children in the spirit of the faith that healed her, emphasizing compassion, justice, and hope. Direct quotes from the novel. Within a few months, Insaf blossomed like a beautiful rose in that loving and well-cared-for home. The Muslim wife found a significant difference between the love of the Indian Christian family and the persecution of the Sudanese Christian family. On that beautiful day, Mark, Lillian, Emily, and Insaf stayed up late into the night. Then the Arab girl retold to them the exact details of her tragic love story with her African lover. On Sunday morning, the Sudanese girl, Insaf, went to church with her Christian family for the first time in her life. She is the Muslim wife who willingly decided to go to their place of worship and pray to their Lord Jesus Christ because he answered her prayer for her beloved African husband, Deng. Wearing a cross becomes a symbol of her journey, from oppression to freedom, from shame to dignity, from silence to voice. Summary table. The role of faith in Insaf's healing. Stage role of faith. Survival and hope prayer as lifeline in darkest moments. Betrayal and transformation crisis of faith leads to spiritual searching and openness. Healing and empowerment embracing new faith brings dignity, agency, and hope. Community and belonging praying with others, finding acceptance and solidarity. Forgiveness and moving on faith enables forgiveness, letting go of shame, and building a new life for herself and children. In essence, faith is both a crucible and a cure for Insaf. While religious authority is used to oppress her, faith, especially as experienced through compassion, prayer, and community, becomes a foundation for her healing, transformation, and hope. Here's a focused summary of what The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed says about justice, how it is depicted, critiqued, and thematically explored throughout the novel. Justice in The Abominable Love. Justice is a central, complex, and often tragic theme in the novel. The story repeatedly contrasts true justice, rooted in compassion, fairness, and human dignity, with the injustice perpetuated by social, religious, and legal systems. 1. Justice as social and legal failure. The novel depicts Sudanese society as deeply unjust, especially toward women, minorities, and those who cross social boundaries. Courts, both criminal and Sharia, are shown as instruments of prejudice rather than impartial justice. Judges and prosecutors are often motivated by religious dogma, racism, and patriarchy rather than facts or fairness. Insaf, the protagonist, is repeatedly falsely accused of murder, adultery, theft, prostitution, apostasy, and denied due process. Her trials are public spectacles, more concerned with enforcing social order than discovering truth. The Sharia court annuls her marriage to Deng not because of any crime, but because of tribal inadequacy, a legal pretext for racial prejudice. 2. Justice as hypocrisy and corruption. The novel exposes the hypocrisy of religious and legal authorities. Religious leaders and police manipulate laws for personal or political gain. Presidential pardons can be revoked by religious authorities, showing that even executive mercy is subject to the whims of the powerful. The UN legal advisor in India betrays Insaf's confidentiality, leading to her near extradition and highlighting the failure of international justice systems. 3. Justice as public spectacle and social control. Trials and punishments are public, intended to shame and deter others, not to rehabilitate or protect the innocent. The community acts as a mob, quick to judge and ostracize, reinforcing injustice through rumor, slander, and collective condemnation. 4. Moments of true justice and solidarity. True justice in the novel is found in acts of compassion and solidarity. The Indian Christian Matthew family, who shelter and defend Insaf at great personal risk, embody restorative justice. Deng's unwavering loyalty, selling his car, hiring a lawyer, risking his life, represents personal justice rooted in love and responsibility. The UN legal advisor in London, Jennifer Beals, who goes beyond bureaucracy to find evidence of Insaf's pardon, is a rare example of institutional justice working as it should. 5. Justice as resistance and hope. Insaf's and Deng's resistance, refusing to accept unjust verdicts, fighting for asylum, and building a new life in Canada are acts of reclaiming justice for themselves and their children. The novel suggests that justice is not given by systems, but must be fought for by individuals and communities who refuse to accept oppression. 6. Justice and its limits. Even when legal justice is achieved, e.g., Insaf's eventual acquittal and asylum, the scars of injustice remain. The novel is clear-eyed about the limits of justice in a world shaped by prejudice and power. Representative quotes from the novel. The prosecutor's arguments are a blend of legal accusation, religious rhetoric, and social condemnation, aiming to portray Insaf as a dangerous example of female rebellion and moral collapse, and to secure the harshest possible punishment as a deterrent. The court's final verdict to impose the death penalty hit her like a major heart attack. She knelt down on the ground and began to cry. Her sympathy for Insaf moved her heart against the judge. Then she expressed her dissatisfaction with strong words. "Your final verdict is a terrible crime in itself. God will never forgive the court for convicting such an innocent girl. You have condemned every woman in Sudan. You have given men the right to enslave and abuse women in this country forever. Justice is not merely the absence of oppression, but the presence of empathy, courage, and the willingness to stand with the vulnerable." Summary table. Justice in The Abominable Love. Aspect: how justice is depicted. Legal system corrupt, prejudiced, upholds social order over truth. Religious authority hypocritical, overrides even executive mercy. Community mob mentality, rumor, and collective shaming. True justice found in compassion, solidarity, and acts of resistance. Limits of justice, even when achieved, cannot erase trauma or restore what was lost. In essence, The Abominable Love is a powerful critique of systems that claim to deliver justice, but instead perpetuate harm. It argues that real justice is found in empathy, solidarity, and the courage to resist oppression, even when the law and society fail. Religion and Justice in The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed. Religion, specifically Islam, and its interpretation through Sharia law, plays a central, often controversial, role in the concept and administration of justice throughout the novel. Here's a detailed analysis, grounded in the document's content. 1. Religion as the foundation of law and justice. Sharia law as legal authority. In Sudan, the legal system is explicitly based on Islamic Sharia law. The judges, prosecutors, and much of the public view crimes, adultery, murder, theft, apostasy, through the lens of religious doctrine, not just secular law. Religious texts as legal justification. Court proceedings are filled with Quranic verses and hadiths, which are used to justify severe punishments, flogging, death by hanging, stoning, and to define what constitutes a crime. Example: the prosecutor opens with a sermon-like speech, quoting the Quran and emphasizing the need for harsh punishment to deter others, especially women, from similar crimes. 2. Religion as a tool of social control and oppression. Patriarchal authority. Religious law is used to justify the absolute authority of fathers over daughters, forced marriage, and the punishment of women for disobedience. Gendered justice. Women are held to strict standards of purity and obedience, and any deviation is met with religiously justified violence, house arrest, forced circumcision, honor killings. Racial and tribal prejudice. The Sharia court annuls Insaf and Deng's marriage not for lack of love or legal irregularity, but because of inadequacy between the tribe of the wife and the tribe of the husband, a concept justified by some interpretations of Islamic law. Example: the judges invoked the Sharia concept of kafa'ah, compatibility, arguing that the marriage is invalid due to inadequacy between the tribes. The judges and Insaf's father openly state that a free white Arab girl should not marry a black African Negro slave, and that such a union is unacceptable both socially and religiously. 3. Religion versus secular justice. Conflict with international law. When Insaf seeks asylum in India and the UK, The Sudanese embassies pursue her extradition not just for criminal charges, but specifically for apostasy, a religious crime punishable by death in Sudan but not recognized as a crime in secular countries. Western law as a haven. The novel contrasts the harshness of religious law in Sudan with the relative fairness and protection offered by secular, Western legal systems, especially for women, minorities, and refugees. Example: Jennifer Beals, a compassionate legal advisor at the UN office, takes Deng's appeal seriously. She insists on the supremacy of international law and human rights over religious or political motivations, making it clear that the UK will not extradite someone to face execution for apostasy or a crime for which they have been pardoned. 4. Religion as hypocrisy and corruption. Manipulation by authorities. Religious leaders, police, and government officials are depicted as corrupt, using religious doctrine to serve personal or political interests rather than justice. Override of secular mercy. Even presidential pardons can be revoked by religious authorities, showing that religious law can override secular mercy. Example: the Minister of Religious Affairs and other religious authorities have the power to override even presidential pardons, as seen when Insaf's pardon is revoked on religious grounds. 5. Religion and the limits of justice.
Public spectacle.
Trials are public, and punishments are intended to serve as warnings to others, reinforcing the authority of religious law in society. No room for compassion. The system is rigid, with little room for empathy or individual circumstances. Even when evidence is presented, religious doctrine often trumps facts. Example: the court's acceptance of evidence is shaped by religious doctrine. Confessions, rumors, and accusations are often given more weight than objective proof. 6. Religion as a source of resistance and hope. Alternative religious values. The novel also shows that true religious values, compassion, justice, and love can transcend dogma and tradition. Characters like the Indian Christian family embody these values, offering Insaf unconditional support and protection. Summary table. Religion's role in justice. Aspect: how religion shapes justice. Legal foundation: Sharia law as the basis for criminal and civil justice. Social control enforces gender, racial, and tribal hierarchies, justifies violence and exclusion. Conflict with secular law: religious crimes, apostasy, adultery, not recognized by secular/international law. Hypocrisy/corruption: religious authorities manipulate law for personal/political gain, overrides secular mercy. Limits of justice: rigid, public, punitive, little room for compassion or individual circumstances. Resistance/hope: true religious values, compassion, justice, sometimes transcend dogma and offer real justice. In essence, religion in The Abominable Love is a double-edged sword. It is the foundation of law and justice in Sudan, but it is also a tool of oppression, exclusion, and hypocrisy. The novel critiques how religious doctrine, when fused with social prejudice, can become a force for injustice, while also suggesting that genuine faith, rooted in compassion and solidarity, can be a source of hope and resistance. Certainly. Here's a detailed comparison of Sharia justice and secular justice as depicted in The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, based strictly on the document's content. Sharia justice versus secular justice in The Abominable Love. 1. Foundations and authority. Sharia justice. Based on Islamic law, Sharia, derived from the Quran, Hadith, and religious tradition. Judges, prosecutors, and the public view crimes through a religious lens. Religious leaders and courts have the authority to override even presidential pardons. Secular justice. Based on civil law, human rights, and legal codes independent of religious doctrine. Courts are expected to be impartial, evidence-based, and focused on individual rights. Executive clemency, e.g., presidential pardon, is final and not subject to religious override. 2. Process and evidence. Sharia justice. Court proceedings are public, with Quranic verses and hadiths frequently cited. Confessions, rumors, and accusations based on social or religious logic are often given more weight than objective evidence. The system is rigid, with little room for empathy or individual circumstances. Secular justice. Trials are based on evidence, legal representation, and procedural fairness. Objective proof, due process, and the presumption of innocence are central. There is room for appeals, executive mercy, and consideration of mitigating circumstances. 3. Treatment of women and minorities. Sharia justice. Deeply patriarchal, fathers and male guardians have legal control over women's lives, e.g., forced marriage, annulment of marriage without consent. Gender-based violence and punishments, flogging, stoning, honor killings, are justified by religious law. Racial and tribal prejudice is codified, e.g., annulment of Insaf and Deng's marriage due to tribal inadequacy. Secular justice. In principle, all individuals are equal before the law, regardless of gender, race, or religion. Discrimination and violence against women and minorities are, ideally, prosecuted, not justified. Refugee and asylum law protect those fleeing religious or gender-based persecution. 4. Punishments and outcomes. Sharia justice. Severe punishments, flogging, death by hanging, stoning, and public shaming. Punishments are intended as deterrents and public spectacles. Apostasy, adultery, and disobedience are capital or corporal crimes. Secular justice. Punishments are proportionate, focused on rehabilitation or deterrence, not public humiliation. Capital punishment is rare or abolished in many secular systems. Apostasy and personal relationships are not crimes. 5. Flexibility and reform. Sharia justice. Highly resistant to change, religious law is seen as divinely ordained and immutable. Religious authorities can override secular decisions, e.g., revoking presidential pardons. Secular justice. Laws can be reformed through democratic or legislative processes. International law and human rights standards can influence and improve justice systems. 6. Examples from the novel. Sharia court annulment. The Sharia court uses the doctrine of kafah, compatibility, to annul the marriage between Insaf and Deng, citing tribal and racial differences as religiously justified grounds for invalidation. Secular justice as refuge. Jennifer Beals, a legal advisor at the UN office in London, insists on the supremacy of international law and human rights over religious or political motivations, making it clear that the UK will not extradite someone to face execution for apostasy or a crime for which they have been pardoned. Summary table. Aspect Sharia justice, secular justice. Legal basis Quran, Hadith, religious tradition, civil law, human rights, legal codes. Authority religious leaders, Sharia courts, judges, secular courts, executive branch. Evidence confessions, rumor, religious/social logic, objective proof, due process, presumption of innocence. Gender/race, patriarchal, discriminatory, codifies tribal/racial prejudice, equality before the law, anti-discrimination in principle. Punishments, flogging, stoning, hanging, public shaming, proportionate, rehabilitative, capital punishment, rare/abolished. Flexibility, rigid. Religious authorities can override secular mercy, reformable, subject to international law and human rights. Refugee protection, apostasy, and moral crimes are capital offenses, asylum granted for religious/gender persecution. In essence, Sharia justice in the novel is depicted as rigid, patriarchal, and often a tool for enforcing social control, with little room for compassion or individual rights. Secular justice is portrayed as more just, flexible, and protective of individual dignity, especially for women, minorities, and refugees. The novel ultimately critiques the use of religious law as a means of perpetuating injustice and upholds secular, rights-based justice as a necessary refuge for the vulnerable. Here's a detailed analysis of how characters in The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed react to Sharia law, based on the actual content of the novel. 1. Insaf, the protagonist. Fear, trauma, and defiance. Insaf is repeatedly victimized by Sharia law. She is subjected to forced confinement, virginity tests, forced marriage, and public shaming, all justified by religious law. When tried in Sharia court, she is denied agency and is punished for disobedience and adultery. Emotional reaction. She feels fear, humiliation, and despair, but also anger and a growing sense of injustice. Over time, she becomes more defiant, refusing to accept the shame imposed on her and ultimately resisting the authority of the court. Example: after her marriage to Dang is annulled by the Sharia court for tribal inadequacy, Insaf is devastated but refuses to abandon her love or her sense of self-worth. 2. Dang, her lover/husband. Anger, frustration, and loyalty. Dang is directly targeted by Sharia law due to his race and tribal background. The court annuls his marriage to Insaf, flogs him for adultery, and ultimately leaves him disabled. Emotional reaction. Dang feels deep anger and humiliation at being treated as inferior and at the injustice of the system. He is frustrated by his powerlessness, but remains loyal to Insaf, risking everything to defend her. Example: Dang openly challenges the court's decision, stating that their suffering is not due to personal failure, but to a system that values race and tribe over love and humanity. 3. Hajj Abdullah and family. Insaf's surrogate family. Conflicted compassion and conformity. Hajj Abdullah initially offers compassion and shelter to Insaf, but when the Sharia court annuls her marriage, he feels compelled to conform to religious law, even against his personal feelings. Emotional reaction. He is torn between empathy for Insaf and fear of social/religious repercussions. Ultimately, he withdraws support, citing religious duty. Example: you cannot live with him as husband and wife after the court of God and his messenger annulled your Islamic marriage. You cannot go beyond God's limits. 4. Insaf's biological family. Zealous enforcement and hypocrisy. Her father and mother use Sharia law to justify extreme control, violence, and punishment. They see themselves as upholding family honor and religious duty, but their actions are often hypocritical and cruel. Emotional reaction. They show little empathy, acting out of fear of shame and a desire to control. Example: her father says, "If my free Arab daughter had committed that shame, I would have opened her womb with this agricultural knife and taken out of her womb the bastard child and smashed his head against the wall." 5. Religious and legal authorities. Rigid, authoritative, and prejudiced. Judges and religious leaders are depicted as stern, didactic, and openly prejudiced. They see themselves as enforcers of divine law, with little regard for individual suffering or fairness. Emotional reaction. They are emotionally detached, sometimes even performative, using the law as a tool for public spectacle and deterrence. Example: we, the 3 members of this blessed court of Allah and His Messenger, announce from today onwards the annulment of the marriage contract, based on the law of inadequacy or insufficiency between the tribe of the husband and the tribe of the wife. 6. Dang's family. Pragmatic and prejudiced. Dang's parents are wary of Sharia law, but also use it to justify their own prejudices and to pressure Dang to conform. Emotional reaction. They are fearful for their son, but ultimately prioritize social standing and tradition over his happiness. 7. Outsiders and international characters, e.g., Jennifer Beals, Matthew family. Shock, disbelief, and advocacy. Characters from secular or non-Muslim backgrounds are shocked by the severity and rigidity of Sharia law. They see it as unjust and work to protect Insaf from its consequences. Emotional reaction. They are moved to compassion and action, often risking their own safety or reputation to help. Example: Jennifer Beals, the UN legal advisor, is deeply sorry and works tirelessly to find evidence to save Insaf from extradition and execution. Summary table. Character reactions to Sharia law. Character/group reaction to Sharia law. Insaf fear, trauma, humiliation, growing defiance, eventual resistance. Dang anger, humiliation, frustration, loyalty, open challenge. Hajj Abdullah and family compassion, but ultimately conformity and withdrawal of support. Insaf's biological family zealous enforcement, hypocrisy, violence, little empathy. Religious/legal authorities rigid, authoritative, performative, prejudiced, emotionally detached. Dang's family pragmatic, prejudiced, fearful, prioritize tradition over happiness. Outsiders, e.g., Jennifer, shock, disbelief, compassion, advocacy, see Sharia as unjust. In essence, victims, Insaf, Dang, experience trauma, anger, and ultimately resistance. Families are torn between compassion and conformity, often choosing the latter. Authorities are rigid and punitive, using Sharia law as a tool for control. Outsiders are shocked and moved to intervene, seeing Sharia law as fundamentally unjust. The novel uses these varied reactions to critique the rigidity, prejudice, and inhumanity of Sharia law as practiced in the story's context, while also showing the possibility of resistance, solidarity, and hope. Certainly. Here's a comparative analysis of reactions to Sharia law across different cultures, as depicted in The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, strictly based on the document's content. 1. Sudanese Muslim society, Sharia as norm and authority. Mainstream reaction. Sharia law is seen as the ultimate authority, divinely ordained, immutable, and the foundation of justice and social order. Religious leaders, judges, and most families enforce it zealously, often with pride and a sense of duty. Community members, neighbors, relatives participate in enforcing Sharia through gossip, rumor, and collective shaming. Victims' reaction. Those who suffer under Sharia, e.g., Insaf, Dang, experience fear, trauma, humiliation, and eventually resistance. Insaf is initially terrified and shamed, but grows defiant, seeing Sharia as a tool of oppression. Dang is angered and humiliated by the racial and tribal prejudice justified by Sharia and ultimately challenges its legitimacy. Progressive/feminist reaction. Characters like Siham Khalil, the feminist lawyer, openly critique Sharia as patriarchal, racist, and unjust, advocating for evidence-based, secular justice. 2. Sudanese Christian community, conditional acceptance, suspicion, and betrayal. Pastor David's family and church. While not governed by Sharia, they are influenced by the broader Sudanese context and often mirror its exclusivity and suspicion toward outsiders, or those who cross boundaries. They offer conditional charity to Insaf, but when her past and her crimes as defined by Sharia are revealed, they betray and expel her, prioritizing their own reputation and religious purity. Their reaction is shaped by fear of scandal and a desire to conform to community expectations, even if not explicitly Sharia-based. 3. Indian Christian community, Matthew family, secular, compassionate, and inclusive. Matthew family's reaction. The Indian Christian family is shocked by the severity and rigidity of Sharia law. They view it as fundamentally unjust, especially in its treatment of women, minorities, and converts. Their response is one of empathy, compassion, and practical support. They shelter Insaf, help her seek asylum, and risk their own safety and reputation. They never pressure her to convert, and their justice is rooted in unconditional love and human rights, not religious dogma. Wider Indian Christian community. Some are hesitant or disapproving, but the Matthew family's actions are ultimately respected as acts of moral courage. 4. Western/international, UK-UN, secular law. Legal and humanitarian professionals, e.g., Jennifer Beals, UN legal advisor. Shock and disbelief. They are appalled by the idea that apostasy, adultery, or tribal inadequacy could be capital crimes. Advocacy and action. They work to protect Insaf from extradition and execution, insisting on the supremacy of international law and human rights over religious law. Secular justice. They see Sharia law as incompatible with modern justice, especially regarding women's rights, freedom of religion, and due process. 5. Sudanese diaspora in India and abroad. Sudanese Muslim students in India. Many react with hostility, slander, and mob mentality when Insaf is accused under Sharia-based norms, e.g., calling her a prostitute, drug dealer, apostate. Some, especially those from marginalized groups or with secular/leftist leanings, are more sympathetic or quietly supportive, but are a minority. Sudanese Christian and secular students. More likely to see Insaf as a victim of injustice, but often powerless to help due to community pressure and fear of association. Summary table: reactions to Sharia law across cultures. Culture/group reaction to Sharia law. Sudanese Muslim society acceptance, enforcement, pride. Victims experience trauma, resistance. Progressives critique as unjust. Sudanese Christian community conditional charity, suspicion, betrayal, influenced by broader norms, fear of scandal. Indian Christian family shock, empathy, practical support, see Sharia as unjust, act from compassion and human rights. Western/international disbelief, advocacy, insistence on human rights, see Sharia as incompatible with modern justice. Sudanese diaspora hostility, slander, mob mentality, Muslim students, some secular/Christian students more sympathetic. Key insights. Sharia law is normalized and enforced in Sudan, but seen as oppressive and unjust by outsiders and victims. Christian and secular cultures, especially in India and the West, react with shock, empathy, and a commitment to human rights, often risking their own safety to help victims. Diaspora communities are divided. Some replicate the prejudices of home, others quietly resist or support victims. The novel uses these contrasting reactions to critique the universality of Sharia justice and to highlight the possibility of solidarity and hope across cultural boundaries. Based on the content of The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, Westerners, especially those representing secular, humanitarian, or international institutions, are depicted as viewing Sharia law with shock, disbelief, and strong disapproval. Here's a detailed summary of how Westerners, such as British authorities, UN officials, and legal advocates, react to Sharia law in the novel. 1. Shock and disbelief. Western characters are repeatedly appalled by the severity and rigidity of Sharia law, especially regarding punishments for apostasy, adultery, and tribal inadequacy. They find it incomprehensible that acts like leaving Islam, marrying across racial lines, or being accused of adultery could result in flogging, stoning, or execution. Example: Jennifer Beals, a compassionate legal advisor at the UN office in London, takes Deng's appeal seriously. She insists on the supremacy of international law and human rights over religious or political motivations, making it clear that the UK will not extradite someone to face execution for apostasy or a crime for which they have been pardoned. 2. Advocacy and action. Westerners in the novel actively intervene to protect victims of Sharia law. They use international law, human rights conventions, and asylum processes to shield people like Insaf from extradition and likely execution. They challenge the legitimacy of religiously motivated punishments, arguing that such laws violate basic human rights and the principles of justice recognized in the West. Example: Jennifer's intervention is decisive in preventing Insaf's extradition and securing her refugee status. She also exposes the embassy's manipulation of information and ensures that Insaf's case is treated fairly under UK and international law. 3. Human rights perspective. Westerners view Sharia law as incompatible with modern justice, especially regarding women's rights, freedom of religion, and due process. They see the legal system in Sudan as oppressive, discriminatory, and in violation of international human rights standards. Example: the novel contrasts the harshness of religious law in Sudan with the relative fairness and protection offered by secular, Western legal systems, especially for women, minorities, and refugees. 4. Institutional response. British police and courts refuse to extradite Insaf when it becomes clear she would face execution for apostasy or a crime for which she has already been pardoned. UN officials, like Jennifer Beals, work to find documentary evidence of Insaf's pardon and use it to argue for her protection under international law. 5. Moral and emotional response. Westerners are depicted as empathetic, compassionate, and sometimes emotionally moved by the suffering caused by Sharia law. They are motivated by a sense of justice that is rooted in universal human rights, not religious doctrine. Summary table. Western reactions to Sharia law in the novel. Aspect: Western reaction. Severity of Sharia: shock, disbelief, strong disapproval. Human rights: see Sharia as incompatible with modern justice and human rights. Action: intervene to protect victims, use asylum and legal advocacy. Moral response: empathy, compassion, insistence on dignity and fairness. Institutional stance: refuse extradition for religious crimes, challenge religious authority with secular law. In essence, Westerners in The Abominable Love view Sharia law as harsh, unjust, and fundamentally at odds with the values of human rights and secular justice. Their response is not just one of criticism, but of active intervention and advocacy for those persecuted under such laws. In The Abominable Love by Dr. A. Ahmed, the debate between secular law and Sharia law is dramatized in a pivotal scene at the Sudanese embassy in London, where the fate of Insaf, the protagonist, hangs in the balance. Here's a focused summary and analysis of how this debate unfolds, based strictly on the document's content. Scene context. Insaf, having fled Sudan and India, is detained in the UK for traveling on a forged passport. The Sudanese embassy requests her extradition, citing her conviction for murder and apostasy under Sharia law. Jennifer Beals, a UN legal advisor in London, intervenes to prevent her extradition, arguing for her protection under international, secular law. Key points of the debate. 1. Sharia law perspective, Sudanese embassy. Sharia as supreme. The embassy's legal advisor insists that Sudan's laws are based on Sharia, which is divinely ordained and overrides secular considerations. Crimes and punishments. Insaf is accused of murder, adultery, and apostasy, crimes punishable by death or severe corporal punishment under Sharia. Presidential pardon overridden. Even a presidential pardon can be revoked by religious authorities if the accused is deemed to have violated religious law, e.g., by converting to Christianity. Extradition justified. The embassy argues that Insaf must be returned to Sudan to face justice as defined by Sharia, regardless of her refugee claims or the nature of her crimes under secular law. Quote, "Our definition of marriage is derived from the divine law based on our holy book, the Quran, and the Sunnah of our infallible prophet Muhammad. Any other type of sexual relations or cohabitation outside this definition is called adultery in our true religion and is punishable by Sharia law, including flogging or stoning to death." 2. Secular law perspective, UN/UK/international law. Human rights and due process. Jennifer Beals and the British authorities argue that secular law is based on human rights, due process, and the protection of individuals from cruel or inhumane punishment. No extradition for religious crimes. The UK and UN refuse to extradite individuals who would face execution for apostasy or crimes that are not recognized as criminal under secular law. Presidential pardon is final. In secular systems, executive clemency, such as a presidential pardon, is final and cannot be overridden by religious authorities. Supremacy of international law. International law and human rights conventions take precedence over religious law in asylum and extradition cases. Quote, "Not in this secular Western country. Therefore, your request to hand over the Sudanese detainee Insaf Salah al-Junaid to Sudan to be killed because she abandoned Islam and embraced Christianity is a violation of human rights and cannot be met." 3. The clash and its resolution. Embassy's argument. The Sudanese legal advisor insists that religious law is above secular law and that the UK should respect Sudan's legal system. UN/British response. Jennifer Beals presents documentary evidence of Insaf's presidential pardon and argues that the UK cannot extradite her for religious crimes or for a crime for which she has been pardoned. Outcome. The UK grants Insaf refugee status, citing international law and human rights, and refuses the embassy's extradition request. Summary table. Debate at the Sudanese embassy in London. Aspect Sharia law, embassy, secular law, UN/UK. Legal authority divine, immutable, overrides secular law, human rights, due process, international conventions. Crimes: apostasy, adultery, murder. Religious definitions: only recognized criminal acts, not religious crimes. Punishments: death, flogging, stoning, public shaming proportionate, no capital punishment for religious acts. Clemency can be revoked by religious authority, final, not subject to religious override. Extradition demanded for religious and criminal offenses, refused for religious crimes or risk of inhumane punishment. Human rights subordinate to religious law, supreme, non-negotiable. In essence, the embassy scene dramatizes the irreconcilable differences between Sharia and secular law. Sharia law is presented as rigid, religiously justified, and resistant to outside influence. Secular law is depicted as rights-based, flexible, and protective of the individual, especially in matters of religion, gender, and asylum. The novel ultimately sides with secular justice, showing it as a necessary refuge for those persecuted under religious law. If you'd like direct quotes from the embassy debate or a more detailed breakdown of the arguments, let me know. As found in your document. These passages capture the clash between the Sudanese embassy's Sharia-based legal stance and the secular, human rights-based position of the UN legal advisor in London. Sudanese Embassy Legal Advisor, Sharia Law Perspective. Our definition of marriage is derived from the divine law based on our holy book, the Quran, and the Sunnah of our infallible Prophet Muhammad. Any other type of sexual relations or cohabitation outside this definition is called adultery in our true religion and is punishable by Sharia law, including flogging or stoning to death. Listen, ma'am. Our concept of marriage is different from yours, said the handsome legal advisor with great anger after feeling annoyed by the unfriendly nature of the beautiful young white lady. We Muslims do not accept any sexual cohabitation between two people as marriage. Our definition of marriage is derived from the divine law based on our holy book, the Quran, and the Sunnah of our infallible Prophet Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace. It is a relationship between two adults of different genders and must be fully approved by their parents and recognized by Islamic law. The marriage contract must be concluded by the imam of a mosque or a recognized Muslim sheikh, such as a marriage authority, and two male Muslim witnesses. The marriage contract must be signed by the bride's father as her guardian, with the signature of her groom. Sharia does not require her presence and signature in the marriage contract. Even if she is a virgin, her acceptance of her marriage with her groom is not a condition, and her father has the right to marry her to any man without obtaining her consent. Any other type of sexual relations or cohabitation outside this definition is called adultery in our true religion and is punishable by Sharia law, including flogging or stoning to death. Madam, I told you that we have religious laws that differ from your secular laws. You cannot force us to follow your Western laws and values. Our Islamic Sharia laws are inspired by God Almighty, while your secular laws are man-made. The Sudanese woman you are talking about has crossed God's limits, and therefore she must be punished for that transgression according to our Sharia law. She is guilty of apostasy from Islam, 2 murders, prostitution, theft, drug trafficking, and forgery. Therefore, she must be extradited to Sudan to face the consequences of her criminal actions. UN Legal Advisor Jennifer Beals, Secular Law Perspective. Not in this secular Western country. Therefore, your request to hand over the Sudanese detainee Insaf Salah al-Junaid to Sudan to be killed because she abandoned Islam and embraced Christianity is a violation of human rights and cannot be met. But your president exempted her from the death penalty after the Khartoum Criminal Court convicted her of killing a pimp woman. Therefore, she is no longer legally responsible for the penalty of this conviction. Who has more power in Sudan, the president or his minister? In religious terms, the Minister of Religious Affairs and Endowments has greater divine authority than any human being in Sudan. Not in this secular Western country. Therefore, your request to hand over the Sudanese detainee Insaf Salah al-Junaid to Sudan to be killed because she abandoned Islam and embraced Christianity is a violation of human rights and cannot be met. Sir, you must know that the Indian court acquitted her of drug smuggling charges. She was also pardoned by your president for being convicted of premeditated murder. Apostasy from Islam is not a crime in this secular country, nor in any other civilized country that respects the Charter of Human Rights. The UK is not an Islamic country like Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Afghanistan, or Sudan. You as a legal official do not have the right to accuse her of being a prostitute or a thief. The United Nations Office for Refugees in London has granted her refugee status, and she will be released from prison today. On the embassy's manipulation and the limits of religious authority. When the UN legal advisor Jennifer Bales placed Al Maidan newspaper in front of the legal advisor of the Sudanese embassy, he jumped back as if someone has thrown a poisonous snake into his lap. In response, he pushed the newspaper away from him until it fell from his large table, then said with fear, "I have nothing to do with this newspaper. Everything mentioned in this damned newspaper is against the Sudanese Islamic government. Someone could be hanged in Sudan if he is caught with this accursed newspaper. It is a communist newspaper, and this atheist party is banned in Sudan. As a legal advisor to the Sudanese embassy, I am not allowed to even touch this damned newspaper with my holy hands." Look, madam, someone who didn't know our Islamic law interpreted the president's speech to you. The presidential pardon obtained by this convicted woman was conditional. Our president pardoned her on the condition that she mend her criminal ways and turn away from her immoral sins. In other words, she had to live a good life after that. Unfortunately, this Sudanese Arab woman broke the law wherever she went. After the presidential pardon and her release from prison, she committed adultery in Sudan with a man other than her legal Muslim husband. She became involved in drug smuggling in India, stole the passport of an Indian girl, and through it she entered the United Kingdom illegally. Do you want us to ask our president to pardon such a criminal young Sudanese woman once again? On the supremacy of secular law and human rights. Not in this secular Western country. Therefore, your request to hand over the Sudanese detainee Insaf Salah al-Junaid to Sudan to be killed because she abandoned Islam and embraced Christianity is a violation of human rights and cannot be met. These direct quotes from the embassy debate scene show the irreconcilable clash between Sharia law, as defended by the Sudanese embassy, and secular, human rights-based law, as upheld by the UN and UK authorities. The novel uses this debate to highlight the limits of religious authority in the international arena and the protection offered by secular justice systems.